John Dean, former White House counsel for President Nixon, telling the House Judiciary Committee today that he sees parallels between Richard Nixon and President Trump. I want to talk about his testimony with Congressman Jamie Raskin, a Democrat from Maryland who is a member of the committee. Congressman, I appreciate you joining us here. Thank you so much.
You bet, Don.
You had the chance to question the former White House counsel under Nixon, which was John Dean. I want to play a part of the exchange. Watch it.
I wonder if you would just tell us why you have decided at this point in your career to come forward to talk about what is taking place in America and in the Trump White House.
What brought me forward was the invitation in this instance, where I thought, yes, I could share with particularly a lot of the people who were on this committee were either not born or they were very young when Watergate occurred. And it's quite striking and startling to me that history is repeating itself, and with a vengeance.
Congressman, was today helpful in shedding some light on what's in the Mueller report, despite the partisanship and not having any of the key witnesses?
Well, it didn't bring any new facts forward, Don. These were not fact witnesses, but I think it was tremendously illuminating in the sense that John Dean essentially told America that there is a history to kind of political corruption, this kind of lying, this kind of deception, and he's an expert in obstruction of justice. He saw it up close with Richard Nixon. He was able to identify the exact same kind of patterns taking place in the Trump administration, according to Special Counsel Mueller's report.
Republican colleagues approached today's hearing very differently than the Democrats. You know, it was very obvious when you saw it. This is what some of the Republicans had to say about the former White House counsel, John Dean. Watch this.
Today, Chairman Nadler brings in front of the Judiciary Committee a guy to talk about obstruction of justice who went to prison in 1974 for obstructing justice.
I did not go to prison.
Okay. You pled guilty to obstruction of justice. I'm glad you got to stay out of prison then, I guess.
Wait a second. Mr. Dean has made a cottage industry out of accusing presidents of acting like Richard Nixon.
You're trying to give us historical context. And when you try to give us historical context, I refer you back to, number one, incredible witness. Number two, biased witness. So much of what you say seems very difficult to accept at face value, quite frankly.
Hearings featuring buckets of chicken and convicted felons, unfortunately, have become the norm for this once esteemed committee.
Are you troubled that so many of your Republican colleagues seem to view John Dean as a villain in the Watergate scandal?
Well, you know what's so wild about that, Don? John Dean was not only Richard Nixon's White House counsel, but he was the Republican staff director on the House Judiciary Committee itself. And it seems like my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle are only troubled by lying by Republican presidents and their subordinates if the Republicans tell the truth about it and they confess to having done it. Then they get really upset with it. But if the corruption is ongoing, if all of the lawless activities taking place right now, they don't care about it. They bury their heads in the sand. So I thought that they really embarrassed and disgraced themselves today. John Dean, even though he is a Republican, even though he was the Republican staff director in Nixon's White House counsel and got caught up in Watergate, he told the truth about it, and everything that he said about it was verified when the Watergate tapes came out. And so these Republicans, had they been on the scene back during Watergate, they would have been cheerleading for Richard Nixon right up until the end. Now, that's not true of all of them. It's not true of Justin Amash, who's an honest Republican who read the report, who said to his colleagues, read the report. You cannot but come away with the irresistible conclusion that this president committed multiple acts of obstruction of justice. And that's exactly what John Dean testified to, and our other two academic witnesses who testified really on behalf of more than 1,000 former federal prosecutors and U.S. attorneys. We're talking William Barr's colleagues who said anybody else in America would have been marched out in handcuffs had they done what Donald Trump did. But simply because of the Department of Justice rule that the president is not indicted, he got away on that technicality. Now it's up to Congress to act.
You asked John Dean about President Trump's Oval Office meeting where he asked Comey to let the Flynn thing go. That's according to the Mueller report. Dean compared that to Nixon instructing his chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, to have the CIA ask the FBI to stop its investigation. What do you make of that comparison? Do you agree with that?
Well, he was drawing historical analogies throughout the entire afternoon. One of the other witnesses said that this was actually not one of the most striking cases of obstruction in there, and there clearly are cases with more vivid facts, like telling the White House counsel that he would be fired and firing him if he did not go ahead and fire the special counsel. In other words, ordering the White House counsel to fire Mueller and then ordering him to cover that up. There were just very dramatic episodes of obstruction of justice that were discussed today, but I was always struck by this particular vignette, and I wanted to get John Dean's thoughts about it, and he definitely saw an historical parallel there.
Congressman Raskin, thank you for your time.
Delighted